You're 35 years old, earning a decent salary, but every time you look at your bank account you feel a tightness in your chest that you can't explain. Even with money saved, you panic. Even earning more than your parents ever dreamed of, you lose sleep thinking about bills. And there's a neurological reason for this that science recently discovered, and it's been hardwired into your brain since you were 5 years old. I know what you're thinking. Another video saying childhood explains everything, that trauma solves everything, that you just need to understand the past to change the present. No. What I'm going to show you here is different. These are neuroscience studies from the last 10 years that mapped exactly what happens in the brains of children who grow up hearing their parents fight about money. And the discovery is disturbing, because this pattern doesn't disappear when you grow up. It adapts. It evolves. And it continues sabotaging your financial decisions in ways you can't even imagine. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you first what happened in your brain as a child. Then, I'll reveal the 3 specific patterns you're carrying today without realizing it. And at the end, I'll give you the only neurologically proven path to reprogram this. Because understanding isn't enough. You need to know exactly how your brain created this trap, so you can disarm it. Let's start with a scene you might recognize. You're 6 years old. It's 9 at night. You're in your room trying to sleep, but you hear raised voices in the living room. Your father and mother are arguing. The words aren't clear, but you recognize the tone. It's about money. It's always about money. Electric bill. Credit card. School. Groceries. You don't understand the details, but your body perfectly understands the danger. And here's what neuroscience discovered happens at this exact moment in your child brain. Your amygdala, that primitive part responsible for detecting threats, triggers a red alarm. For a child, conflict between parents isn't just uncomfortable. It's an existential threat. Because evolutionarily, a child depends completely on their parents to survive. So when parents fight, the child's brain interprets it as a risk of family unit dissolution, which means risk of death. But here's the part that changes everything. In this moment, your brain doesn't just register fear. It registers the cause of the fear. And the cause, in your child mind, isn't the parents. It's money. Money becomes synonymous with danger. Money becomes synonymous with conflict. Money becomes synonymous with threat to safety. There's a study from 2019 at the University of Wisconsin that followed 250 children for 20 years. They started monitoring children from families with financial stress. They measured cortisol levels, did MRI scans, mapped brain activity. And 20 years later, when these children became adults, they discovered something shocking. Even those who now had financial stability, even those earning well, showed the same pattern of amygdala hyperactivation when exposed to financial decisions that adults who grew up in financially calm homes didn't show. Let me translate this. Your brain was trained, at 6 years old, to enter survival mode every time you need to deal with money. And this pattern didn't disappear when you grew up. It stayed there, operating in the background, sabotaging every financial decision you make. And this is where it gets really interesting, because this pattern manifests in 3 specific ways. 3 behaviors you probably have now, as an adult, that seem completely disconnected from your childhood. But they're not. They're survival strategies that your 6-year-old brain created and your 35-year-old brain is still executing. The first pattern is what researchers call anxious financial hypervigilance. You know this. It's when you check your bank account 5 times a day. Not because you need to, but because your body feels you need to. It's when you have money saved, but can't relax. It's when you make obsessive spreadsheets, control every penny, create catastrophic scenarios in your head about what could go wrong. And the cruel part is this doesn't make you more secure. It makes you exhausted. Because what's happening neurologically is that your amygdala is constantly searching for the threat it learned to associate with money. You grow up, earn money, build security, but that primitive part of your brain is still in that room at 6 years old, listening to the parents fight, desperately trying to monitor the danger. So you check the account. Again. And again. And again. It's not financial discipline. It's trauma disguised as responsibility. I had a client who had $400,000 invested. $400,000. And she literally cried with anxiety every week thinking she would lose everything. When I asked when was the last time she actually had a financial problem, she said never. As an adult, never. But at 8 years old, she saw her parents lose their home. Her brain was living a reality that hadn't existed for 27 years. The second pattern is even more insidious because it looks like the opposite of the first, but it's the same root. It's what we call dissociative financial avoidance. It's when you simply can't look at your account. Don't open the statement. Don't check bills. Don't do planning. Leave everything on autopilot and hope for the best. And you know this is self-destructive, but when you try to force yourself to deal with money, something inside you shuts down. This isn't laziness. It's not irresponsibility. It's your brain trying to protect you the same way it protected you as a child. When you were small and heard the fights, you couldn't solve the problem. You couldn't make the parents stop fighting. You couldn't earn money for the family. So your brain learned that the only way to deal with this uncontrollable threat was to shut down. Dissociate. Pretend it's not happening. And now, as an adult, whenever you need to make an important financial decision, your brain automatically activates the same strategy. Shuts down. Because the alternative, which is feeling that visceral fear you felt as a child, is neurologically unbearable. So you procrastinate. Postpone. Avoid. And your finances become a silent disaster you only notice when it's too late. Neuroscientist Bessel van der Kolk, who is one of the world's leading authorities on trauma, explains this in a way that gave me chills when I read it. She says the traumatized brain doesn't distinguish between past and present when activated. To you, rationally, you know it's 2025, that you're an adult, that you have control. But to your amygdala, when you look at that credit card bill, it's still 2005, you're still 6 years old, and you're still completely powerless before a threat that can destroy everything. Now, the third pattern is the hardest to identify because it hides behind a mask of success. It's what we call compulsive hypercompensation. You recognize this if you're that person who works to exhaustion. Who can't say no. Who always needs to earn more, do more, prove more. You look from outside and it looks like healthy ambition. But inside, you know the truth. It's not motivation. It's terror. Because when you were a child and saw your parents suffering financially, your brain registered a simple and devastating equation: insufficient money equals danger, therefore sufficient money equals safety. But here's the trap. Your brain never defined how much is sufficient. Because for that 6-year-old child, no amount would be enough to guarantee the parents would never fight again. So you grow up and get stuck in an infinite cycle of never being enough. You earn $10,000 a month, but want 15. Get 15, but need 20. Reach 20, but now 30 is the new minimum. And the tragedy is that each financial achievement should bring peace, but brings only temporary relief followed by a new goal that your traumatized brain defines as necessary for safety. You're running from a danger that only exists in your emotional memory. And there's a cruel detail in this pattern. Often, people with this profile become financially successful. Earn a lot. Accumulate wealth. Impress everyone. But inside they're empty. Because they're not building wealth. They're building a fortress against a ghost. And fortresses against ghosts are never high enough. I once worked with an executive who earned $90,000 a month and had a panic attack every time he thought about taking vacation because it meant a month without producing. When we explored his history, we discovered that at 7 years old he saw his father get fired and the family going through hardship for 6 months. That 7-year-old child decided he would never, ever, be like his father. And now, 40 years later, he was living an entire life trying to prove to that child he was safe. But he never was. Because that child doesn't exist anymore. Only the brain pattern he left behind exists. Now you might be thinking, what do I do with this? Because understanding is important, but understanding doesn't change behavior. And you're right. There's an abyss between knowing you have a pattern and being able to reprogram that pattern. And this is where most people get stuck. Because our instinct is to try to use logic to solve an emotional problem. Try to use the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of the brain, to control the amygdala, the emotional part. And it doesn't work. I'll give you an example. Imagine you're afraid of dogs because you were bitten as a child. You know, rationally, that not every dog bites. You know most dogs are harmless. You can read 1,000 articles about canine behavior. But when you see a dog on the street, your body panics anyway. Why? Because fear isn't rational. Fear is an automatic amygdala response that completely ignores what you know. The same happens with money. You can read all the financial education books in the world. Can perfectly understand how to budget, how to invest, how to plan. But if the problem is a traumatic emotional pattern, rational information doesn't solve it. It's like trying to put out a fire with an instruction manual about combustion chemistry. The manual might be correct, but it's the wrong tool for the real problem. So what works? Neuroscience in the last 15 years discovered that the only way to reprogram emotional patterns in the amygdala is through one specific thing: corrective emotional experiences. Let me explain what this means in practice. A corrective emotional experience happens when you face the trigger of your fear in a context where the expected threat doesn't materialize. And you need to feel this, not just think about it. It needs to be a visceral, bodily, emotional experience. Because that's how the amygdala learns. It doesn't learn with words. It learns with experiences. So I'm going to give you the 3 specific steps that research shows work to reprogram these traumatic financial patterns. And pay attention, because this isn't couch therapy where you just talk about feelings. It's a structured neurological protocol. First step, you need to identify what your specific trigger is. And I'm not talking about money in general. I'm talking about very concrete situations that activate your pattern. It could be looking at your bank balance. It could be making a big purchase. It could be talking about money with your partner. It could be seeing an unexpected bill. You need to know exactly what lights up your amygdala's alarm. How do you do this? You start paying attention to your body. Because your body knows before your mind. Every time you deal with money for a week, you notice, where do I feel discomfort in my body? Tightness in the chest? Knot in the stomach? Tension in the shoulders? Urge to flee? When exactly does this happen? In what specific context? And you write it down. Literally write it down. Because your rational brain needs to map what your emotional brain is doing. What you'll discover is that it's not every type of financial situation that activates you. It's very specific situations that have an emotional similarity to what you experienced as a child. It might be that you deal super well with everyday purchases, but freeze completely when you need to invest. Or the opposite. It might be that you have no problem earning money, but have irrational guilt every time you spend. Each person has their unique trigger that was sculpted by the unique experience of their childhood. Second step, and this is the most important, you need to create gradual micro-exposures to your trigger while keeping your nervous system regulated. Let me translate this. You're going to expose yourself on purpose to what scares you, but in doses so small that your body can process without entering total panic. For example, if your trigger is looking at your bank account because it triggers anxious hypervigilance, you're not simply going to decide to stop looking and hope the anxiety passes. That's avoidance, and avoidance reinforces fear. But you're also not going to force yourself to look obsessively trying to desensitize by brute force. That only traumatizes more. What you do is this. You choose a specific time of day. A time when you're relatively calm. Preferably after something that naturally calms you, could be exercise, could be meditation, could be a shower, could be a good conversation. Your nervous system is regulated. And then you're going to look at your bank account for exactly 15 seconds. No more. 15 seconds. You set a timer. And during those 15 seconds, you do one crucial thing. You breathe. Slow, deep, deliberate breathing. 4 seconds inhaling, 6 seconds exhaling. Why? Because controlled breathing is the most powerful tool you have to send a signal to your brain that you're safe. It's the only automatic body function you can consciously control. And when you control your breathing, you're literally telling your amygdala, there's no danger here. 15 seconds. You look. You breathe. And when the timer goes off, you close. And you notice, I survived. Nothing bad happened. My fear predicted catastrophe, but reality was neutral. This is the corrective emotional experience. Your brain just learned, through direct experience, that the trigger isn't dangerous. And you repeat this. Every day. Always in the same regulated context. 15 seconds. After a week, if you notice your body is tolerating better, you increase to 30 seconds. Then 1 minute. You're gradually reprogramming your amygdala's response through repeated experiences of safety. The third step is what closes the cycle and makes the change permanent. You need to create a new narrative about what money means. Because remember your 6-year-old brain created an equation? Money equals danger. This equation is engraved as absolute truth in your emotional memory. And the only way to overwrite an emotional belief is with another stronger emotional belief. So you're not simply going to tell yourself, money isn't dangerous. That's too rational. It has no emotional power. What you're going to do is create micro-experiences where money becomes a symbol of care, of freedom, of real security. And you do this by intentionally associating money with positive emotions. For example, you take a small amount of money, could be $50, and you use it specifically to do something that nurtures you. It's not about buying things. It's about using money as a self-care tool. Could be buying that coffee you love. Could be paying for a massage. Could be buying flowers for your home. What matters is you do this consciously. You hold the money. You think, I'm using this to take care of myself. And you feel the pleasure of the experience. Your brain starts creating a new association. Money is no longer just the thing that made your parents fight. Money is also the thing that allows you to have moments of peace. And each time you repeat this, you're sculpting a new neural pathway. You're creating a competing pattern with the old pattern. And with enough repetition, the new pattern can become stronger than the traumatic pattern. This isn't positive thinking. It's not empty affirmation. It's applied neuroplasticity. You're using the same emotional learning mechanisms that created the problem to create the solution. And there's something I need to tell you because otherwise this video would be dishonest. This process is slow. There's no hack. No shortcut. No magic pill. Because you're not just changing a behavioral habit. You're reprogramming a neurological pattern that was sculpted by years of repetition in your childhood. The good news is it works. The research is clear. Corrective emotional experiences genuinely change the structure and function of the amygdala. But it takes time. It takes consistency. It takes patience with yourself. And there are moments where you'll regress. There'll be a week where everything was improving and suddenly you have an unexpected bill and all the old pattern comes back with full force. And you'll feel it's not working. But this is normal. This is expected. Regressions don't mean failure. They mean your brain is in the process of change. All learning has two stages, integration and consolidation. Regression is part of consolidation. What do you do when this happens? You don't punish yourself. You don't give up. You simply notice. You think, interesting, my old pattern was activated. Makes sense because this situation resembles what scared me as a child. And you go back to the protocol. Breathing. Micro-exposure. Corrective experience. Again. And again. And again. Until one day you realize that trigger that used to paralyze you now only bothers you slightly. And then, who knows, doesn't even bother you anymore. I want you to understand one fundamental thing that changes everything when you really absorb it. You're not broken. You're not defective. You're not financially incapable. You're someone whose brain brilliantly learned to survive in a specific environment. The strategies your 6-year-old brain created were perfect for the situation you were living. Hypervigilance kept you alert to danger. Avoidance protected you from feeling what was unbearable. Hypercompensation gave you some sense of control in a world that seemed chaotic. The problem isn't that these strategies were wrong. The problem is they got frozen in time. Your brain continued executing child survival solutions to adult problems. And it doesn't work anymore. Not because you're flawed. But because the context changed and the pattern didn't update. And there's something deeply liberating in this understanding. Because you stop fighting yourself. You stop hating yourself for having financial anxiety. You stop feeling guilty for avoiding bills. You stop exhausting yourself trying to prove your worth. You start having compassion for that 6-year-old child who did the best they could. And you gently, patiently, start teaching your brain that now you have resources that child didn't have. You have control that child didn't have. And most importantly, you have security that child was desperately trying to create. If you made it this far, I want you to do something for me now. Comment down below, which of the 3 patterns did you recognize in yourself? Anxious hypervigilance, dissociative avoidance, or compulsive hypercompensation? I read all the comments and we create a real conversation here. Because one of the most powerful things to break a traumatic pattern is realizing you're not alone. That millions of people carry this same invisible wound. And if this video made sense to you, if you felt that click of recognition, leave a like because this helps the algorithm take this message to more people who need to hear it. And subscribe to the channel because the next videos will deepen each of these patterns with even more science and even more practical tools. And if you want to go even deeper, I'll leave in the description a video about how financial guilt is formed in childhood and destroys your ability to thrive as an adult. It's the other side of this same coin. And you'll understand why you emotionally punish yourself every time you have financial success. Until next time.